So I'm going to get going, even though we're quite a small group this afternoon. So what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon is a study that I did with some schools in London, and it then was the basis for a small report for Education Development Trust, who I work for. And I work for the part of Education Development Trust that's called London Connected Learning Centre, and we are a centre in London working with teachers, training teachers, and also we have children that come to our building and do activities, and we support everything to do with learning and technology. And over the past few years, we've been supporting schools in using blogs in an educational way. And we started to see a lot of potential in this. So this is the basis of this report, and I'll show you where you can download that. Okay, so to start with, I'd like to know a little bit about you, what your role is, and if you have any experience of blogging yourselves, either reading and enjoying blogs personally, maybe even writing a blog, or you may have actually used blogs in an educational context. So, yeah, if I can start with you. Have you been involved in blogging at all? So, yeah, I just wanted to find out what experience you might have had of blogging.
My experience?
Yeah.
I'm a teacher in primary school in the southern of Jordan. I was teach for I was teaching in the secondary school for 8 years, and
And yeah, do either of you have any experience of using blogging in an educational context? Okay, so probably then for most of you it will be reading other people's blogs, as you say, to learn things. Well, in the UK and I think in many other English-speaking countries, there's been quite an explosion in the use of blogs. And these blogs are very specific blogs, so they are for an educational purpose. And some teachers will have an individual blog for each child in the class, but the blogs that I've been involved with and worked with schools in London have been class blogs. So it's been where one teacher has one blog for the class. And there are some examples here of some of those blogs. So you can see the different year groups, like year 5, year 4. So each class will have their own blog. And the children and the teacher will post the learning on the blog over the course of a school year. So why have these schools thought it's a good idea to blog? Well, one of the reasons has been about connecting with parents. They felt that a blog is a really good way to communicate with parents who they may not see every day. They want to be able to show the learning that's happening in the classroom. And you know, when children come home from school and the parent says, "Oh, what did you do in school today?" And the child says, "I can't remember," or nothing. There's something about a blog where actually the parent can see straight into the classroom and they can see what learning has been happening. So it can be a really powerful way to connect with parents. It can also be a way to connect with a global audience, and that might be a family audience. So in London schools, many children have family members in other countries, so it's also a way to keep in touch with the family, or it could be just other people that are interested. And blogs can become a kind of digital magazine, a bit like a newsletter in some ways. But there are also some teachers who really are seeing blogs as a way to motivate children and in their learning and to motivate them specifically with writing. And that's what I want to talk about this afternoon. Okay, so we're going to use a little bit of technology here. So I've got some examples of blogs for you to look at, and there are two ways you can do this. I've got some iPads here, and we can have a look at these examples using a QR code, or if you've got a phone with a QR code reader on, then that might be something that you would prefer to do. And I'll just see if I've got the URLs. See here, the children have written, pretending that they're Juliet, and they've done a diary. And then you can see that the teacher has commented back to the child and said, oh, a good start to your diary entry. So that's the first example. Another example from the same school, from The Winter's Tale. They've been studying The Winter's Tale, another Shakespeare play. And the teacher has said, is Leonates within his rights to be jealous and angry with both his wife and his best friend, or is he being unfair? And then the children have responded. This one is a bit different. It's an individual blog, so it's just one child, and this is from Canada. But in a similar way, the children have been writing in role, so like a diary entry. And here you can see that Finn is imagining that it's 1844 in the 19th century, and he's writing about travelling to Canada. So that's his blog. And then we have another one here, which is the news. Yeah, sorry, no, that's not the New Zealand one. Okay. But I wanted to just show you those to give you a few examples of the kinds of work that schools are doing with blogs and the kind of ways that they're using them within the learning, within the curriculum, to develop writing. So there was just a brief look there, but was there anything that struck you, anything that you noticed about those blogs, anything maybe that surprised you when you looked at those?
Not really surprised, but I was thinking, when actually can we reach a point where we can use this here in our public sector schools, where we can actually integrate this culture of communication and interaction between a student and a teacher, where a teacher can actually ask for a certain assignment, and then students can start answering questions or responding to something like Romeo and Juliet through a blog.
Yeah, and it is, there needs to be a lot of things in place for that to happen, and I'm not suggesting that, everyone is necessarily able to do that if they don't have the right technical support in school or the time. But I think it's sort of showing what's possible, and it may be that some teachers could start say a pilot in a school. So there may be a few teachers that would be interested to experiment, and this is what we noticed in the schools that we work with, that it started with a few teachers who started to experiment with blogs, and then in some of those schools now they've made it obligatory for every teacher to have a blog. But that took several years, and it usually started with one person. And I'll talk about this a bit later, but for some teachers they started it for homework, and they started it as something optional for the children to do. So it was like, if you would like to do this at home, here's the link. You could write something and then we could look at it in class. So there are different approaches, and yeah, it does require quite a bit of support within the school. But having said that, I've seen also teachers that have got to grips with it quite quickly, especially if someone else has actually physically set up the blog for them. But yeah, very, very important question that you ask. So moving on to the specifics of our research study, what we wanted to look at was, were there differences between writing that was happening traditionally in the exercise books and the writing that was happening on the blogs. And we also wanted to look at what was the best practice. So where was there practice that teachers were doing that we could then share with other teachers? So one of the first areas of good practice that we saw was this idea that we called an invitation and framing. So the way that the teacher asked the question of the children on the blog made a real difference to the quality of the writing that children did. So in those examples that we just saw, like the Shakespeare examples, the teacher has asked a specific question. I have seen blogging where it's just free and open and the children can do what they like and they can post whatever they want to. But we felt that to make it an educational blog, it was better that there was some kind of framing for it to be linked to the learning that was happening in the classroom. And so this kind of questioning, but the reason we called it an invitation is we wanted it to be inviting for children. We wanted children to read something and then think, oh, I'd love to write about that, not just my teacher has told me to do it. And one of the teachers in the project, he used little films and videos as a way to invite children to write. So, for example, he found a website that had lots of little short films, like this one, about the lonely robot. So it's the story of a robot, and he finds himself in the woods, and he then goes back to the factory where he was made. And the teacher has said, watch the film, then write it as a story. Someone lost and lonely is wandering through the woods. Describe him, his surroundings, his feelings and thoughts, but change the ending. So the idea here is that there's something to stimulate the children, something that they can watch, that they can then start thinking about and then do their own writing. And then on the blog you can see that there are 47 different entries responding to this invitation from the teacher. And this is one of the stories that one of the children wrote. This little boy, Krzysztof, a Polish child who hadn't been in the country very long, he was just learning English, hadn't been learning English for that long, but the teacher said this was the best piece of writing that he had done, and he was really stimulated by the blog and maybe felt less anxious about writing on the blog. So this was his story about the lost, lonely robot. Here's another invitation. So this time, the children did some work in class. They were learning about space, and they had made a rocket. So you can see a little video here. So just a few seconds of the activity that happened in the classroom, but then the teacher has put that onto the blog, and he's then asked them to write up the experiment that they did in creating the rocket. So it was like, for the children, it was a memory of the practical activity that they had done, and then when they were doing their writing, they had that little prompt so that they could remember the activity that they did in the classroom. And quite a few of the teachers would link the work that they were doing around literature to the blog as well. So if they were reading a particular book in class, they would then write about that book. So one of the classes, a year 6 class, so 10 and 11-year-olds, they were reading this book, Trash, and it's about some children that live in the Philippines who live on a rubbish dump. So this was the book that they were reading. And the teacher was able to use the blog to give the children some more information and context that would help them in reading that story. So he found a YouTube video of a charity worker who'd been working with children that live on a rubbish dump in the Philippines. So they were able to then visualise what they were reading in the storybook. And then he put some invitations for writing on there, so they had to watch the film, and then they had to say, why did you go to the Philippines, what happened there, how is she helping children, and why is education important for those children who live on that rubbish dump. So there's another example of an invitation to blog. But there was also something about the blog that was a bit more of a democratic space. So it wasn't only the teacher that would say, okay, I'd like you to write this, I'd like you to do this, I'd like you to read this, watch this. The children themselves were also asking each other questions on the blog. So, for example, this one from Rakim, and they were doing some work about spies and stories about spies in class, and he just decided by himself to write this on the blog as a message for the children in the class. So he's saying, I was thinking of it, I should write a story. This also applies to everyone as well. If you want to, you could write a page a day, or not, of how your spy is. What would be really amazing if you could write a story, not a long one. Remember, this was just a suggestion for me to know more about your spies, as I will be checking your stories. If you're wondering, this is Rakim, and so he goes on. And we thought this was very interesting, that actually it's a child asking another child to write and giving an invitation to write. We also started to see blogs as being like a learning medium, or a bit like a digital portfolio, because all the different work that happened on the blog was kind of collected together in one digital space, and we found this to be quite powerful. And this, I based this on the work of somebody called Helen Barrett, who's written a lot about digital portfolios. And I think the blog represents a digital portfolio very well, because on the blog, it's a place where children are putting work, so it's a showcase. It's a place where we're putting children's work so the rest of the world can see it. But it's also a place to save that work, so the teacher and children themselves can go back and look at learning that's happened before. But it's also the actual workspace, so it's the place where children are doing that writing. They're actually writing within that online space. And as well, it's a reflection space, because it's where children are thinking about their learning, and we know how important that is. So, some more examples from the classes that we worked with. This class here were a class of 8-year-olds, and they were studying the Vikings, and they had a visitor from the Viking centre. They dressed up as Vikings and they went to the park and enacted a battle. They wrote stories about Vikings. They also did another project at another time about bees, and again they had a visitor to the class. They had a beekeeper who brought in honeycomb. They learnt about bees. They wrote stories about bees. And then from another class, they were studying Galileo, and they did videos of speeches that they'd written as Galileo. So what you were able to do with these class blogs is you were able to look over time at all the learning that had happened, because there was a record of not every single bit of learning that happened, but a lot of the learning that happened in class was represented on the blog. So the children and the teacher could scroll back and they could look over the whole year and they could say, oh, remember when we learnt about the Vikings? They were able to reflect and go back, and we know it's important for children to revise, if you like, what they've learnt, even sort of some weeks and some months and years afterwards. So this idea of it being a learning medium was really important. And I interviewed the children at the end. We worked with them for 6 months, the different classes, 4 different classes we worked with for 6 months. And at the end of the 6 months, I said to all of the children, what would happen if the principal in your school, if your teacher said, we're not going to do blogs anymore, it's too much work, it's too difficult, we're going to stop it. And they all said they'd be upset. And this little girl said, if we had no more blog, I'd be upset, our memories would be wiped away. I thought that was quite interesting because of it being this place of being a record of the learning. And also lots of the children said that when they were due to go to secondary school, that they wanted to keep looking back at their primary school blog, because it was going to be important to them in the future to remember their happy days at primary school. And again, that this learning that was happening in the class was shared with the parents. So the parents were part of that whole story of what was happening. Children could say, I'm going to show you my history project, my science project, and the parents could see it. So in the study, not all of the teachers encouraged the children to write from home, but 2 of them did. And they would set up the blog so that the children could go into the blog at home and do their own writing. And in fact, this teacher had started the blog by, she had a teddy bear, and the teddy bear, the children would take it in turns to take the teddy bear home. And on the night that they had the teddy bear, they would write something about the teddy bear and write something on the blog. And so you can see here this little girl, Esme, has written about it being her birthday and her taking the teddy bear home from school to celebrate her birthday. And the same child also wrote this. So she had a collection of her great-great-grandparents' objects. And she wrote this story, and this was a story that the rest of the children in the class were really, really interested in. So you can see it's the story of her great-great-grandmother dying when she was on a journey, but they still had the handbag with the ticket from what had happened in this family story. So the story was passed on through the generations, and it was obviously something very important to this little girl for her to actually want to share that with the rest of the children in her class on the blog. You saw the pictures earlier of the class that were doing the Vikings project. So those were the 8-year-old children. And so they were doing lots and lots of work in school and blogging in school about the Viking project. But this little girl, Helena, she decided one evening that she was going to do some writing on the blog. So you can see that at 7:08 in the evening, she's written this Viking poem or Viking rap. Wanna be a Viking, it's time to go and rule. Wanna be a Viking, don't have to go to school. Wanna be a Viking, drink buttermilk from my horn. It's great to fight when you're a Viking. So she's done this not because it's homework, but because she's interested. And you can see that she's learnt lots about Vikings in her class, and she's demonstrating that in the poem that she's writing. And we thought this was really interesting to see that linking between what's happening in the classroom and then the child being interested to do this at home. So that was the evening of the 24th of April. And then on the 25th of April, the next morning, at 7:26 in the morning, she's back on the computer and she's back doing some blogging. And this time she's writing a story as if it's a TV report, but again with the theme of the Vikings. So it's like a TV news. Hello, you're watching the VVC News with Tom Redbeard and Ruby Sword. Today's top stories are: a bunch of Danish Vikings have just took attack to Greenland. It's not a good sight. Loads are dead and there are more Vikings in their longboats heading for Greenland once again, and so on. But you can see that she's mixing probably her experience of watching the news and hearing about things on the news with the historical learning that she's doing in her classroom. And this was kind of feeding the learning that was happening in school. So this area of, what was different about the writing in the books and the writing in blogs. So what we weren't saying is, oh, you must do all of your learning on the blog. The teachers were still doing their traditional learning with exercise books. But the children were quite perceptive about some of the differences, and that the way that the teachers actually behaved in a different way when they were using the blog. So they said that the teacher was much more positive to their writing on the blog than in their books. So that in the books the teacher said, oh, look at your handwriting, look at your punctuation, but on the blog they were more interested in the children's ideas. And the other thing that was really, really important about the blog is that children were reading each other's work. And in the books, maybe sometimes the teacher would ask a child to stand up and read, but that wasn't really happening. But on the blog, they would look at other people's, and the way this child said, we can read other people's work and get inspiration. This was something really quite different that was happening with the blog. So this, I think, is where the digital enables a kind of an opportunity for collaboration, which traditional learning doesn't. And Alan November talked about that this morning, and also the students this morning that spoke to us, they talked about that, the accessibility using digital and that opportunity to collaborate with digital. And then the teachers themselves also commented on this. So they talked about being a bit freer themselves when they were setting work to be done on the blog. So they felt it was a more creative space, that it was a more free and open-ended space, less confined. So that's some of the same comments there. So another area of good practice that we saw was teachers who took quite a bit of time to prepare for blogging. So they would do lots of work before the children started to blog. So this teacher here, Mariam, was talking about she would do loads and loads of other activities, storytelling and drama and drawing and reading stories, before she actually asked the children to do blogging. So there was lots and lots of preparation work, and this was very much her approach to get children to write really well and really imaginatively. It was like to kind of feed them with ideas and with inspiration, and then they would be able to draw on that in their own writing. And here some pictures from her classroom, and they were doing a whole piece of writing based on the Vikings, a piece of writing called The Plot of the Gods, and they were writing about the Viking gods. So you see they did a comic here, and then this is their drama work that they were doing, and then that led to the work on the blog. So there's their comics, and then their stories. So they'd really thought about these stories and planned them in quite a lot of detail. And they worked together as a group to write this story. One of the functions of a blog is commenting, and that also was something that you can't do in quite the same way when you're using analogue, when you're using paper. But commenting is such a feature of blogging. It could be very powerful. So the comments that teachers wrote back to the children, but also the comments that children wrote to each other. But of course, if you're going to have children commenting on each other's work, you need to make sure that they understand how to do that in a way that's kind and helpful and positive. So this was a sign in one of the classes we worked with. So be positive, offer help, give praise, say what you like, ask a question. And I've seen some other advice from other classes as well. This is from an American school, so they tell the children to be very specific, so give a compliment if you're commenting on another child's work. And there's a video that this class produced.
Hi, it's Mrs. Yolis from California. Panda and I are here to talk about commenting. You know, the comment section is my favorite part of the blog. That's where people can respond to what you've written. You can write back to them. You can get some great conversations going in the comment section. So, let's talk about what makes for a good comment. My students have some excellent tips for you.
I like your shirt. Thank you. You're welcome. We're talking about complimenting. Whenever you leave a comment, it's always nice to open with a specific compliment.
If you like the blogger's writing, tell them.
If the blogger needs to navigate, compliment them. Be positive and be specific.
It's always good to add factual information to your comment. For example, if someone's writing about the Statue of Liberty and you've seen it or read about the Statue of Liberty, go ahead and write some new factual information. How old is it? How tall is it? Be sure to look at the comment section to make sure no one has written what you want to say. And if no one has, go ahead and write it. Have fun adding factual information to your comment.
To make a comment better, it is nice to have a connection with the writer. Connections remind people of things. For example, let's say your friend published a post about their camping trip. It reminded you of hiking a Big Bear. Then you might want to share some facts about your trip.
So we quite often show that to children when we're preparing them for using blogs and for commenting. And it, probably for most teachers, they don't necessarily use the comment function initially, so you can turn it on and off. And the other thing is that teachers, when they do start using the comment function, they have to moderate it, so it doesn't go public on the blog until the teacher has said yes, that's okay. So they get like a notification that a child has written on another child's work. So I was going to do an activity at this point, but maybe I'll just tell you what the activity is. So what we've done quite often with schools is to get children to understand this idea that this is a personal piece of writing, and you need to really, really think carefully about how you're positive in your comments. We get them to write something, a story or something about themselves, and then all of the children in the class, they lay out their writing on the tables, and the children go around with post-its and they write a comment on every child's work. So then each child will have all of these comments. So it's to sort of try and fix in their mind that when you're on the blog, this is the same thing, and that, you know, if somebody gives you a post-it and says something upsetting about your writing, that would really hurt you. So the teachers do a lot of preparation around that. They don't just open it up and say to kids, say whatever you like about other children's work. But that's been a really nice activity, the kind of paper comment activity, before actually letting children free on the blog themselves to comment on each other's work. And children said that they really enjoyed the comments. They enjoyed the comments very much from their teacher, and they enjoyed the comments from other children as well. So this child's saying, you know, she feels that people really care. And again, the emphasis is on the peer communication. Blogs, we know, can be seen by everyone in the world if you set them to be public, but for us the really important audience was the internal audience of the class itself. And there's been a lot written about how digital kind of enhances this participatory culture. And there's a guy called Henry Jenkins at MIT, and he talks a lot about participatory culture and how digital has kind of shifted the way that we're able to participate and work together. And we found that this was really was the most powerful thing about the blogging, that the children were reading each other's work, commenting on each other's work, engaged in what each other were doing, and that it kind of made for more collaboration together. And that felt like a big change for the classes that were involved in doing the blogging. So, of course, doing this requires a class to have access to technology. And I'm sure that's probably something you're sitting there thinking, well, this is all very well, but if we haven't got the technology, then, you know, how can we do this? In these London classes, all of the schools had like an ICT suite that they could book that had computers in there. One of the classes had 6 computers in the classroom, and one of the classes had 1 iPad in the classroom. So the classes, they sort of did it in a slightly different way. So for some of them, they would all go into the ICT suite, into the computer lab. They would sit down, and then it was like, okay, now we're going to do our blogging. And because they had to book it, that might be 40 minutes, and that was all they had. the class that just had the one iPad, it was one child at a time, and the iPad sort of went around, and through the week the children were doing the blogging. In the class that had the 6 computers, the way he did that teacher organised it, is that every day he had a time when they were doing literacy activities, but in groups, so like a carousel. So one group would do the blogging, one group would be doing some work with him, one group would be writing a story. So they'd have different things, and each day they would change around. So it was a bit different in all of the different classes. And that meant that there were different outcomes for those children. Because where the children only had that time that was booked in the computer suite, then it was what we call short burst writing. It was like, okay, come on everyone, you've got to get your writing done. It's the only time you're on the computer. And so they didn't have the opportunity to go back and improve their writing. So having the technology in the classroom obviously makes a big, big difference. But I think even if there is no technology in the classroom, most children have technology at home. So they might have a tablet or a phone or a computer, a laptop at home. So I think one way to start experimenting with this idea of educational blogging would be to do something from home. So, I mean, do you have a sense of whether that would be something that would be possible in Jordanian schools, or do you think that would be very difficult? You're already doing that, yeah. So for homework, yeah. Right, yeah, 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 yeah. So are they using a blogging platform, or yeah? Okay, the school's platform. So so how long have you been doing that? Right, yeah. And have you, yeah. Yeah. And have you noticed some of the differences in writing or collaboration or? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, 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 and I guess with older children, young people, they can be quite independent. So, yeah, 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 and I think you're right that. Yes, and yeah, so there's a lot more work for the teacher. But I think, where it depends, different types of schools. Some schools are all through, aren't they? Like that you have secondary and primary together, so it might be that a teacher in the secondary might try it and then gradually it goes down, but sometimes it can be the other way around if you have a teacher that's enthusiastic in the primary school. And how about you? Do you think that it would be possible to do something like this in primary as like a homework, like a home learning opportunity?
In public school, it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to apply this. Yeah. Maybe if you find like one private school has like super motivated teachers and principals who are willing to be like a pilot to try it, and you need to make sure that infrastructure and internet access and technology will be provided to that school to experiment if the experience will actually be successful there. I think it just needs equipment and people who are willing to do it.
And in schools where they have those pressures, that the time factor.
And maybe community, like parents who actually would understand this and follow up on their children doing this at home also.
Yes. Sometimes you don't depend on parents, but it depends on the society definitely.
Yeah.
Because if they don't have access to internet at home, they don't have computers and technological devices, it will be hard. But actually the kids nowadays, really, they don't depend on their parents. They get along with technology with ease. It's part of their life, better than us.
But yeah, I think as a teacher you do need to know which children may not have, for example, internet at home. And with one of these classes that started off doing the blogging just from home and just from choice, like if they could do it if they wanted to, and it did tend to be the girls from wealthy families that started it. Whereas in some of the other classes, like one of the classes which was a much more disadvantaged school, that teacher didn't do it from home. He was the one, and he did have computers in the classroom. So then it was like an entitlement. It's like everyone's doing it. 6 children are going to do it today, 6 children tomorrow. But he did have then the computers in the classroom.
And on let's say the number of our students in the classroom, if you want to work on this and invite the students and work inside the computer lab, let's say, it will take a long time to divide into 6 and work, especially the kids, the youngsters. But the elder ones, it's fine, they can manage together.
And of course, there's schools are using all kinds of different platforms and learning management systems and Google Classroom and a lot of these same things that we're talking about you can do in all of those kind of platforms. But I think even if it might take a long time and many schools need a lot of support, it's kind of where it's going, isn't it? That having some kind of an online space as well as the classroom, what's happening in the classroom. So, but anyway, the access to technology is the key question, really. Is this possible or not? And yeah, I understand that will be different in different contexts. So that was the class that had the computers in the classroom, and that was one of the classes that had the computer lab.
The atmosphere of the class.
Sorry,
saying the classes differ, the atmosphere of the class. It depends on the school.
Yeah.
The atmosphere. If they're talking about public schools, they don't have the minimum facilities.
Another thing that was, if you like, a barrier was typing skills, keyboard skills. So in some of the classes they had been taught typing. They were also, sometimes they were set typing for homework. Like, there are different websites that are games. They're done like a game. So the teacher would just say, oh, well, like tonight, practice your typing. And then there were some classes where they'd never had any input about how to type. But where they'd had the input, there was just a fluency in the children's ability to type. And of course there was a big difference in the younger children and the older children, because we had a class with 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, and then 2 classes with 10, 11-year-olds. And of course the older children were more proficient at typing. For the younger ones, it could be a barrier, just the physical manipulation. And we looked at some research that had been done around handwriting by somebody called Jane Medwell. And she had written about how when children have some training in handwriting, you can get what she calls automaticity. So, you know, when children are learning to write and it's like very, very laborious, they haven't got that, they haven't got the speed of getting their ideas onto paper. And we felt that there was something similar happening with the keyboarding skills, with the typing skills, that you need to have good enough typing skills that you can get your ideas fast onto the computer. I mean, of course, things are changing, and now we've got quite good speech to text. Like if you're writing in a Google Doc, you can just speak into it and it will type for you, and then you might just need to edit it. But I think we're still at the stage where young people do need some actual input around typing. So sort of something around typing skills just to get that fluency. So we found that as well, that there was, in some classes, there was a lack of fluency in writing on the blog, and that meant the writing was better in the books than on the computer, because the children couldn't type fast enough to get their ideas out. So the conclusions of our study, the teachers said that they felt that the children had a kind of sense of audience much more. So the sense of the audience of like their parents and people around the world and the public, because they knew that their writing was going to be seen by lots of other people. They also had very much the idea that the rest of the class was their audience, in a way that writing the books the class was not their audience. And then this really important point that they were kind of conscious of their writing. They understood it was going to be read by other people. And because they were reading other children's writing, they had a kind of criteria to judge their own writing against. And I think the point that you were making about them, about the teenagers that you're working with, that motivation. So that was the thing that was a real kind of game changer in those classes, is that the children were much, much more engaged and excited and motivated by writing. Suddenly it felt like something fun to do because they were doing it on the blog, whereas writing in their books, it wasn't the same for all children, and there were some children that we interviewed who said, actually, we prefer writing in our books because we don't want everyone to see what we write. But on the whole, the children involved were very motivated by the writing on the blog. So then a few more quotes from the teachers. So they felt that it gave the children stamina. It gave them writing stamina. And this one teacher in particular said that he felt that boys were more enthusiastic about writing on the blog than girls were. I don't know, is that something that you've found, or not a difference? No, yes, I think he was saying the other way around, that generally the boys are reluctant to write, but on the blog they were more enthusiastic. Yeah. 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 It seems to be universal, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, they're still children, aren't they? Yeah. So that was a factor, and then, as we've just said, this sense of the attitude to the writing, the confidence in the writing, and being less cautious. So the more they did it, the more confident they became, and the more confident they came to have this idea that anyone could read their work. You know, to begin with, it's like, do I really want people, do I want my auntie and my grandmother to read my writing? And most of the schools did start, I must say, they started with keeping the blog private, and then it was later that they then made it public. You did it private. Is it still? Do you still have it as a private? Yeah. So it's just for the community. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that is the like I said, you know, the powerful bit of learning is between the peers. So I think so in a way it doesn't matter if it's public or private, but the public nature means you can get that parental engagement. So there are other benefits, but I think it needs to be on a school by school basis to decide if you want to have it as public or as private. So then just taking up this theme of the stamina, that so one of the teachers, who was quite a sporty teacher, and he said that he felt that it wasn't that doing writing on the blog was better than doing writing in the books, but that it gave a different kind of experience. And so he felt that his children were becoming stronger writers, a bit like if you're doing training in one sport and another, you can improve your overall strength of your body. So he just said that it was, each type of writing had its own benefits, and so he felt that it was really important. And he used the blog actually as a form kind of assessment. So in England we have people that come in to moderate the work. So people like inspectors will come and say, right, we want to see all the children's writing. We want to get a sense of what level your school is at with writing. And he started to use the blog as a place for those inspectors to come in and have a look, just to say, okay, look, here's all the children's writing, and they were able to then make judgments about that. And the other thing, so this teacher said that the children made really a lot of progress because of the blog, and he put it down very much to doing this daily writing and writing with stamina and enthusiasm for writing. But we identified some paradoxes in our study. So the teachers, they said that we knew that the blog was going to be a public space and that anybody could look at that blog and, if you like, make a judgment about that school. But even though it was for a public audience, the teachers weren't really stressing the importance of accuracy. So actually, some of the spelling, punctuation on the blog was worse. Do you find the same? Yeah. 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 And it's a bit, I think there's something for children that it's like when you're on Facebook or when you're texting, you can be a bit casual with your writing. Yeah. Yeah. But we were saying to the children, well, actually, this is a school blog, so we're expecting you to write as well and accurately. And then the other thing was that during this study we looked at lots of other blogs from different countries. So we looked at lots of blogs from Canada, US, Australia. And what we noticed in those countries is that the accuracy was better. But we did a questionnaire, but those teachers said that they did lots and lots of revision. So whereas our teachers, like the children they'd write the blog, done. But these other teachers in the other countries it's like, write the blog, that's your first draft. And that actually on a blog you can edit and redraft it. So that was really something that we fed back to the teachers, that we thought they could do more revision, actually use the blog as a space where you can revise. And then this idea of that, everyone goes on about blogging in education is good because lots and lots of people are going to read it, but it's actually what we've just been saying, that it was about the peer audience, the school community, the class community. That was the really important audience for the children. It was each other. So then our recommendations for teachers, this idea of the quality invitation, so that, you know, it really matters what the teacher writes on the blog and how they frame it and how they ask the question. That we think that teachers should use a blog specifically to encourage writing, because it's a really popular thing to have a class blog in the UK. But a lot of them, if you look at a lot of the blogs, it's just pictures, and it's the teacher that's done it, not the children. So it's like, here we are doing science, here we are doing maths, here we are doing a project. And it's nice to see the pictures and to see the learning, it's nice for the parents, but often they're not sort of capitalising on using the blog as an online space to get children to work on it and write there. Something I haven't really mentioned in this afternoon, but we write about quite a lot in the report, is that writing in role has a really beneficial effect. So whether you're writing on a blog or in an exercise book, so it's the idea that children can imagine themselves into somebody else's shoes, and then it ups the quality of their writing. So if you say to a 10-year-old, you're going to be writing as a scientist that has gone to the Antarctic, suddenly they're able to write the scientific language, but it's almost like children playing, but it does improve their writing. So the best writing that we saw was writing in role. So some of the examples was the class that did the topic on learning about bees, and then children wrote about being a bee, and they used all the science that they'd learnt about the bee, but they put it into a story. Or there was another one that wrote about imagining that they were a tooth, or imagining they were a particular person with a particular job. But writing in role we saw as a really important approach to encouraging writing, improving writing. And what worked best on the blog was this cross-curricular learning, so where you've got a bit of history and a bit of science and a bit of English all together, so kind of topic work. So that's why some of those history topics work really well on the blog. Then this point I made about revising, redrafting, editing, encouraging children to read each other's blogs, and then this thing about teaching children how to comment. Don't expect that they know how to do that, again, because they use Facebook. It's not the same commenting on an educational blog. And then, of course, and this is where it's the time-consuming factor, that it needs to be set up so the teacher is the one that moderates everything. They get notified. Nothing goes public until the teacher has okayed it, and then that there is that time factor. So that can be a barrier. So those were our recommendations to other schools. And what's been encouraging is in our locality, the teachers that worked on this project presented at some conferences, and then really encouraged other teachers. So in our locality we've now got a lot more schools doing blogging. And then final quote, so this idea that if you can make writing something positive without negative connotations, then that's a very powerful thing. So that was the game changer for those classes. So I finished slightly early, but I wanted to have opportunity for questions, and I didn't know whether people would have questions about like technical aspects or blogging tools. And again, I suppose this will depend on your context, and as you say, you've already got a platform, so that's something that you're up and running with, and
maybe we're trying to work with something different, like office mix. Yeah. So we're trying to create this. So the teacher has their own
So they have their own space. Yeah. So that is a bit like Google Classroom. Yeah. And then they have all the assignments on there and everything. Yeah. But yeah, I think that kind of online space is, and as you say, with the control of the teacher. And any examples of schools that you might have worked with that you think are kind of ready to use online tools in this kind of way?
And we are working with trained teachers, through RTA. I think still there is no public school use blog, but we are trying to encourage teachers to use discussions through learning management system we use at QRTA to deliver online and blended learning. So I think it's easy to make it as discussion wall. Also something else, I think blogging is better when you know exactly the purpose of using this. It's for activity you want your student to finalize it, or you want them to read something and interact more, like observed learning if you want to apply this strategy. I think it's better if the teacher know why to use this program.
And I think in some of those examples, as you say, the kind of flipped learning idea, so that it's what can you do with a blog that you wouldn't be able to do without a blog? So like, what problem does it solve? So in the same way that you're talking about having a system where a teacher can put all of their resources, something like just putting that YouTube of the Philippines to help the children understand the story that they're reading. It's quite a simple thing. It's not complicated, but that wouldn't have been possible a few years ago. And actually, if you can have whatever system it is, whatever platform it is, a place where the teacher can put resources, children can maybe look at videos in their own time, and they're having the face-to-face with the teacher, but they're also having input from the resources they're interacting with on the online platform. So we're kind of at an interesting time, I think, in education, where it's moving into the digital, into the blended, and we're working out kind of what that balance might be. And it's not that one is better than the other, but it's where you can enhance. Okay. So I have finished 10 minutes early. I didn't do the practical activities. I think if it had been a bigger group, then we would have done like the commenting activity and so on. But anyway, thank you very much for your attention.